Imagine buying your dream ranch, only to have a bossy HOA Karen show up at your gate waving papers and shouting that you don't even own your own land. Crazy, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. But here's the twist. While she thought she had all the power, she had no idea I'm the man who actually governs every HOA in the nation, and she picked the wrong fight. You won't believe this. Karen actually tried to evict me from my own ranch. Let that sink in for a second. The land I paid for with my hard-earned money. The property where I built every fence post, raised every barn wall, and poured years of sweat and love into. The place I called home, the land where my horses roamed free and my family gathered around the fire pit at night. And yet, somehow, Karen, the self-appointed ruler of the neighborhood, thought she could walk up to my gate and tell me I had no right to live there. It was early morning when it all started. I was sipping my coffee on the porch, enjoying the quiet, when I saw her storming up the driveway like she owned the place. She had a folder clutched in her hand, stuffed with papers, and an expression that screamed trouble. Without even saying hello, she shoved those papers at me like they were the final word of law. Her voice was sharp, dripping with arrogance as she shouted, "You can't live here anymore. The HOA doesn't allow this type of property." At first, I almost laughed. I honestly thought someone was pulling a prank on me. Who in their right mind would try to evict a rancher from his own land? My deed was clear, my rights undeniable, and my home wasn't even under her HOA jurisdiction. Yet there she was, acting like she was the queen of the county, convinced she had the power to erase my life with a single piece of paper. But this wasn't a joke. This was Karen. Loud, bossy, and absolutely addicted to power she didn't really have. She lived for confrontation. She lived for control. And now, she had set her sights on me. The funny part, she had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought I was just another homeowner she could bully into silence, someone who would roll over and do whatever she demanded. But the truth... Oh, the truth was far bigger than she could imagine. Because while Karen thought she was challenging a simple ranch owner, she was actually going head-to-head with the one man she should never have crossed, the person who oversees every HOA in the nation. She had picked the wrong fight, and she was about to find out just how badly she had messed up. Karen marched up to my front porch with a level of fake confidence I'd never seen before. Chin high, chest puffed out, and that smug little smirk plastered across her face, she acted like she had already won the battle before it even began. Without so much as a "good morning," she shoved a stack of papers toward me and barked, "You need to vacate immediately." I raised an eyebrow, half amused, half annoyed, and asked her calmly what on earth she was talking about. She didn't hesitate. Karen launched into a laundry list of so-called violations she claimed I had committed. According to her, my horses were unapproved animals, my barn was an illegal structure, and even my sturdy wooden fencing somehow broke community rules. Now, mind you, I live on a sprawling ranch. Open fields, livestock, tractors, the whole deal. This wasn't some cookie-cutter subdivision with manicured lawns and mailbox regulations. This was land I had worked hard to buy and maintain. Yet here was Karen, standing on my porch, trying to convince me that my way of life was against some imaginary set of rules. I chuckled and said, "Karen, what community are you even talking about? This is my private ranch, not a suburban block with a cul-de-sac and a pool club." But Karen wasn't listening. She didn't want to listen. People like her never do. Instead, she pulled out her phone with a dramatic flair, waving it in my face as if dialing a number would somehow make me vanish into thin air. "I'll call the HOA board right now," she threatened, her voice sharp and dripping with self-importance. Here's the kicker, though. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that every single HOA board in the country ultimately reported up to me. See, my story isn't just that of a rancher. Years ago, I got involved with local councils. At first, it was just to make sure small-town folks had a fair say in how their neighborhoods were run. But one opportunity led to another. From city housing boards to state committees, from state committees to national councils, I worked my way up the ladder, one step at a time. I saw the good HOAs, the bad ones, and the downright corrupt ones. And I made it my mission to create order out of the chaos. Eventually, I was elected as the head of the National HOA Governing Association. That meant every single HOA, whether it governed a high-rise condo in New York or a desert subdivision in Arizona, fell under my oversight. The final say, the ultimate authority, rested with me. And there Karen was, standing on my porch, wagging her finger, yelling at me about rules she clearly didn't even understand. She thought she was flexing her power, but in reality, she was making a fool of herself in front of the very person who could end her HOA career with a single phone call. She had no idea that the man she was trying to push around, the rancher in worn boots and a dusty hat, was actually her ultimate boss. And I was just getting started. Instead of blowing my cover right then and there, I decided to sit back and let Karen dig her own hole deeper. There's something strangely satisfying about watching someone talk themselves into disaster, and Karen was doing exactly that. She planted her feet firmly on my porch, hands on her hips, and launched into a tirade like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. She waved those papers around like they were sacred scrolls, as if a stack of badly photocopied HOA guidelines could somehow erase the deed to my land. First, she declared that my barn was too tall for the neighborhood standard. She said it so confidently you'd think she had built the barn herself. Never mind the fact that barns, by definition, are supposed to be tall, for hay storage and, actual animals. According to Karen, my barn towered over the community aesthetic, and therefore had to go. Next came my horses. She looked at them like they were giant, menacing beasts rather than the gentle animals grazing peacefully in the field. These aren't approved pets, she snapped. You can't just keep farm animals in a residential area. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Farm animals? On a farm? What a shocker! And then, the cherry on top, my tractor. Karen wrinkled her nose and said, "That thing is ruining the neighborhood's aesthetic." As if the sight of a working tractor, on a working ranch, was some sort of crime against humanity. To her, it wasn't a tool that put food on the table, it was an eyesore. But Karen wasn't done yet. Oh no. She actually had the audacity to complain about the smell of fresh hay. "It's a nuisance," she whined, pinching her nose dramatically. At that point, I nearly lost it. Fresh hay, the smell that most people associate with open fields and the countryside, was, in her mind, an environmental hazard. When she finally paused for breath, I asked her politely, "Karen, did you actually read the HOA bylaws for this area?" She rolled her eyes and scoffed. "I don't need to read anything. I'm the vice president of the HOA board here. I make the rules." That was the moment I almost doubled over laughing. She truly believed her self-appointed title gave her ultimate authority. But here's the truth. If she had even glanced at the bylaws, she would have realized something painfully obvious. My ranch wasn't even under her HOA's jurisdiction. She had no authority, no power, no standing, nothing. She was swinging a plastic sword, convinced she was holding Excalibur. Still, I didn't snap back. I didn't reveal the trump card I had up my sleeve. Instead, I stayed calm, leaning against the porch railing, letting her pile up complaint after complaint. The more she talked, the more ridiculous she sounded, not just to me, but to the neighbors who had gathered nearby, watching the spectacle unfold. I let her wave her papers in my face. I let her rant about barns, tractors, and the smell of hay. Every word out of her mouth was another shovel of dirt in the hole she was digging for herself. And all the while, I was quietly preparing for my next move, the reveal that would turn her entire world upside down and remind her that she was nothing more than a small fish trying to swim in the wrong ocean. The next week, just as I expected, Karen went all in. She filed an official complaint to the HOA Council, stuffing it with exaggerated claims and half-baked arguments. She was convinced she had me cornered, that she'd finally proven her authority. But instead of replying right away, I stayed silent. No emails, no calls, nothing. I wanted her to believe she was winning. Because when people like Karen think they're in control, they get careless. And when they get careless, that's when they fall the hardest. Soon enough, the council scheduled their big meeting, an event Karen insisted I attend so the board could vote me out. She spread the word around the neighborhood, bragging that she was about to put the rancher in his place. By the time the evening came, the community hall was packed. Neighbors, board members, even curious onlookers filled the chairs. Everyone wanted to see the showdown. I walked in calmly, binder in hand, while Karen was already planted at the front table, chin lifted high like a judge ready to hand down a sentence. She greeted me with a smug smile, whispering to someone next to her, This will be over quickly." The meeting began, and Karen wasted no time seizing the spotlight. She stood, cleared her throat dramatically, and began reading from a stack of notes. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "we have before us a serious violation of community standards. This man," she practically spat the word, "has constructed an oversized barn, is harboring unapproved animals, has created constant noise with his machinery, and worst of all, has turned our beautiful neighborhood into a nuisance with foul odors." She rattled off accusation after accusation, pausing only to glare at me, as if daring me to interrupt. The room filled with uneasy whispers. Some people nodded, unsure if her claims were true. Others exchanged skeptical looks, clearly unconvinced. Finally, she slammed her papers down, folded her arms, and said, "The decision is clear. We must vote to remove him from the community immediately." Silence followed. Everyone turned to me. I didn't rush. I let the moment hang in the air. Then I stood up slowly, placed my thick binder on the table with a heavy thud, and looked directly at the board. "Before I respond to these accusations," I began, my voice steady but firm, "allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is your name, and I am the governing authority over every HOA in the nation. Every single one of your boards, yes, including this one, answers to me." The effect was instant. The entire room froze. Whispers stopped. You could hear the sound of a chair creaking in the back as someone leaned forward in shock. Karen's smug grin evaporated, replaced by wide eyes and a face that went pale as chalk. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out, only a faint gasp. I reached into my binder and pulled out the official documents. Thick papers, signed and sealed, carrying the insignia of the National HOA Governing Association. I laid them on the table one by one for the council to see. "These are the documents confirming my position," I said, sliding them forward. "Every HOA in this country, whether it governs a condo in Florida, a gated community in Texas, or a cul-de-sac in California, falls under my oversight. That means I have the final say in cases like this one. And let me be absolutely clear. Karen here has not only overstepped her authority but has outright violated the principles she swore to uphold." Gasps rippled through the room. Board members leaned over the papers, their eyes darting between the seals, the signatures, and me. They knew it was real. I turned back to Karen, who was now visibly trembling. "You accused me of violating rules that don't even apply to my property. You tried to bully me into leaving land that isn't under your jurisdiction. And worst of all, you abused your title to harass your own neighbors. That, Mrs. Vice President, is a major violation in itself." Karen stammered, I didn't know," but her voice cracked, and she couldn't finish the sentence. "I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to." The truth was louder than anything she could ever say. Turning back to the council, I concluded, "As of this moment, I'm recommending a formal review of Karen's position on this board. Her actions are reckless, unprofessional, and damaging to this community. She does not represent leadership. She represents abuse of power." The room erupted in murmurs, but the decision was already clear. Karen's authority had just crumbled in front of everyone. And the best part? She had destroyed herself by dragging me into this meeting in the first place. For the first time, Karen wasn't the loudest voice in the room. She wasn't feared, respected, or even tolerated. She was exposed. And there was no coming back from that. Karen's downfall was swift, brutal, and, if I'm being honest, well-deserved. Within just a few days of that infamous meeting, the board moved quickly to strip her of her position. All those years she had spent bossing neighbors around, intimidating families, and making people believe she was untouchable came crashing down in an instant. The council issued her a formal warning that practically read like a scarlet letter. Every word of it spelled out what the community had known for a long time but had been too afraid to say. Karen wasn't a leader. She was a bully, a fraud, someone who mistook fear for respect and control for authority. And once her mask slipped, no one wanted to stand beside her anymore. The transformation in the neighborhood was almost shocking. People who once tiptoed around her, afraid of her constant complaints and threats, now crossed the street to avoid her altogether. The woman who used to strut through block parties with her clipboard and fake smile now shuffled past neighbors who whispered behind her back. She wasn't the queen of the HOA anymore. She was the punchline. Meanwhile, for me, life on the ranch carried on without interruption. My horses still grazed peacefully in the pasture. The barn doors still creaked open every morning as I tossed bales of hay inside. The tractor still roared to life when it was time to plow or haul feed. In other words, nothing about my daily life changed, because the truth was, Karen never had any power over it in the first place. But the community had changed. For the first time, they saw Karen clearly for who she was. They realized the woman who constantly shouted about rules was only interested in bending those rules to suit herself. They realized the person they thought had authority was just another neighbor with too much ego and too little understanding. And more importantly, they realized they didn't have to live in fear of her anymore. The irony of it all was almost poetic. Karen had marched up to my porch waving papers, trying to evict me from my own land. She believed she was untouchable because of her shiny little HOA title. Yet in the end, she discovered the cruel truth. The man she had tried to intimidate was the very person who governed the entire HOA system she clung to like a crown. And let me tell you, nothing felt sweeter than watching her world crumble in that moment. Nothing felt better than seeing the shock in her eyes when she realized she had picked a fight she could never win. So the next time you run into someone like Karen, someone who thinks their title makes them untouchable, someone who tries to control everyone around them, remember this: sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding the most power. And when the truth finally comes out, that power doesn't just speak, it roars. Because bullies can shout, they can threaten, and they can wave their papers all they want. But real authority doesn't need to scream. Real authority speaks with calm, with confidence, and with truth. And that truth, it always wins in the end. So in the end, Karen tried to evict me from my own land, and ended up losing everything instead. Remember, the loudest bully in the room isn't always the one with real power. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more jaw-dropping tales, and share this with someone who's had to deal with a Karen in their life.